Hello, this is the quad quantizer mode on the Disting EX. This provides 4 independent or linked CV quantizers with microtonal capabilities and useful MIDI interaction, which I'll show later. So absolute basic usage patched in here. I've got an LFO from my Disting over here into the input on the EX, which is doing the quantization, and then output to the CV input, the volt per octave input on this miniature synthesizer voice, which sounds like this. I guess possibly the first thing to show would it be unquantized. So let's, if I just bypass the disting completely. So that's the LFO shape. Put the quantizer back in the patch. There we go, and we can see the note it's quantizing to here. As with many of the EX algorithms, if you do that, you get a much bigger, more useful display when you're not actually needing to edit the parameters. So that's just watching for a change of CV and quantizing it when it notices it's changed. The other fundamental mode of operation you might want to use is a triggered quantization, in which case you need to find the parameter for the gate input, so Quantizer 1. The input-output mapping is, as you'd expect, inputs 1, 2, 3, 4, quantized to outputs 1, 2, 3, 4. So if we change the input, change Quantizer 1 to have a gate input, we'll use number 6 because that's currently unused. That's nothing, and then I've got another LFO up here which I'm going to mult into, well, first of all I'll send it into the clock on this thing. So now the quantization is only happening when it gets a trigger here, which is controlled from this LFO, so I can change that there. And then I can also mult this trigger into the gate on the synth voice, so it doesn't have to be running the whole time, and then we get that. So that's super simple. Let's just run through the parameters on the quantizer. So as I said, there are 4 quantizers. Most of the parameters for each one is in a row, and then you're up to number 2. Each quantizer can share its settings or can have its own settings. So in this particular case, you see I've gone up to Quantizer 2, and the share parameter it says with 1. So Quantizer 2, which is that to that, is going to use exactly the same settings as Quantizer 1. So that just saves you having to set a whole bunch of different stuff if you just want to use the same settings on 4 different CVs. If I change that to off, then I can start editing the settings of Quantizer 2. But I'll leave that as with 1 for now, and so on for 3 and 4. If I go back to the parameters of Quantizer 1, the first is the Scala MTS scale file selection, in common with many of the algorithms on the EX. Currently that's set to none because we're not using any microtuning. Same for the keyboard map. So we'll just skip over those for now, come back later. Quantize mode, also I'll come back to that later because that only really applies when you're using microtuning. And then we're into some much more straightforward things. So input transpose is a transpose before the quantizer. Shift is a shift of the scale within the quantized scale. So that's pretty much the same as a transpose when you're using a 12-tone equal tempered scale. But if, say, you have a 7-tone scale, that's shifting by 1 degree of that 7-note scale, which is obviously very different from shifting it by semitones. Then key and scale work together. At the moment, we're just quantizing chromatically. Let's say I change the scale to be major. Then you can hear that I'm now getting the notes from the scale, and you can see on the display quite clearly that I'm only getting the white notes in this case, because I'm in the key of C. If I change that to the key of D, then I start getting some C sharps and F sharps. So it's not shifting up and down, it's just changing, choosing a different scale. So that's so far so good. There's a variety of different scales in here, major, minor, dominant stuff. If you want fancier selections of notes, then you can start using the keyboard maps. Let's leave that on, I'll leave it on major for now, I guess. Output transpose, again, very straightforward, is straight transpose after the quantizer. And then the outputs can also have a slew applied for a bit of bend. If I just leave that on all the time. It's quite a fast slew. It can be super slow. I'll just slow that right down. Possibly too slow to hear. Anyway, you know what slew sounds like. So there we go, that's the output slew. So let's start talking about microtuning, I guess. So, as I say, this is common to many algorithms on the disting EX. The first thing we want to choose is our scale. So let's choose a nice just scale, and then we'll find an appropriate keyboard map. Say this one. Actually, no, let's do that one. So this is based on AS440. And now you can see we start getting much more information in the big visuals display. This is explained in more detail in the manual, but I'll just run through it. The top line is the input CV, which is changing much more rapidly than the notes changing because we're triggered still here. The second line is the actual sampled CV that was taken when it was triggered. And then we've got these two MIDI note numbers, which relates to how the note has been interpreted and then how that's been mapped to an output scale. Again, more on that when we get into slightly more interesting scales. And then the last line is the actual output note in terms of a equal tempered semitone plus sense, and then that bit there is the ratio from the Scala file. So what I'm going to do is just take out this LFO and start driving this from a keyboard so we can be a bit more in control of it. So bear with me. Now we're controlling it from this wee keyboard here. So let's just go back to no microtuning. Okay. So then, very straightforward. I press my CV for an A, I get an A, B, C, D, E. And it's not giving me any further information there because it's not adjusting it from equal temperament. If I get my just scale, and the keyboard map I'm using is based on AS440. So if I play an A, I'm going to get an A which is tuned to the standard MIDI tuning of AS440. So now with my just scale, as I go up and down the scale, you see I get the ratios. So that's my just fifth, ratio of 3/2, my just third. Which you can see is a whole 13 cents off a equal tempered third. So that's that. If you go to this view, so when you're editing just one quantizer, that view focuses on the quantizer. When you're looking at something that's a bit more generic, you get this view, which we saw before, which just showed MIDI note numbers. Now we're using equal temperament. It shows us a bit more information, which is the note name, but also the absolute pitch in cents and then a pitch in hertz. So A is still 440, C sharp is 275 hertz. If I turn off that scale, well, it's not showing me that. Let's actually select a Scala file which does equal temperament, and then I'll get that information. C sharp is now 277 hertz. Anyway, so that's microtuning. So what I'd like to go back to now is the quantize mode, which we skipped over earlier. This particularly applies when you've got microtonal scales with more than or less than 12 pitches per octave, where you don't have that neat mapping from a layout on a keyboard, say, to pitches in the scale. So for this, I'm going to go back to using my LFO, and I'm going to turn off gated operations so that we've got a constant stream of notes, and I'm going to turn that up so we can hear it. Okay, so at the moment we're in equal temperament. So let's choose a scale with 19 pitches. This is 19 Edo, 19 equal divisions of an octave. Find an appropriate keyboard map. There we go. So our pitch is running up and down over about a volt, and we're getting 19 pitches from that. So if I just do that, then you can see the pitches coming out bear no relation to an equal tempered scale anymore. And the note numbers in the middle don't really reflect MIDI note numbers anymore. They reflect degrees in the scale where you've got 19 pitches per scale. So in this nearest mode, that's exactly what you're getting. It's going to take the input CV, find out where the nearest pitch in this 19 tone scale is to that CV, and give you that pitch output, which is quite different to mapped. Whereas mapped is going to use the input as if it were a 12-tone equal tempered CV to look up the 19-tone pitch based on the keyboard map. So let's go back to the keyboard, which is possibly going to make that clearer. So go back to nearest mode. So as you can hear, as I run up the keyboard, an octave is still an octave. These pitches are giving me the nearest pitch within my 19-tone scale to this equal tempered input. If I go to mapped, then that's no longer an octave, because what it's doing is basically counting 19 of these before it hits an octave. So if I go from, say here, one, I'll start a bit lower. Can't see why not. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. That is now an octave. So that's the mapped. So just to reiterate, it's taking the equal tempered CV from the FH2 in this case, and then looking up based on the keyboard map which note it's going to take, which pitch it's going to take from the 19-tone scale. So there. Of course, you don't have to do that. There's also, you can use the keyboard map, for example, to do something like this, which is, it's called 12 of 19. So this keyboard map basically looks up one of the 19 pitches from a 12 input. So you only get 12 different pitches per octave, but they're taken from the 19-tone scale. So far so clear. So that's my attempt to explain what the difference is between nearest and mapped. If it's not clear from that description, maybe study the manual a little bit more. but that's what that's all about anyway. So the next thing I just want to touch on briefly is how the keyboard map can be used to change the overall tuning independently of selecting the actual scale. So this is my nice justly intoned scale, and this is the A equals 440 keyboard map that we've been using. I also have another one here, which is CS261. Now this one is using exactly the same scale, bear in mind, but this one has C defined as the tonic of the scale. So if I start on C, that's now justly intoned. Now, you can see the real difference when well, you can hear it actually. I mean, I'll play an A. So that's A defined as 440 or 220 in fact there. If I change to here, you can hear the difference in those two pitches. That's an A when the A is defined as 440. That's an A when it's defined as the sixth of a scale based on C. And if we go into, just to make that point again, so A, nicely tuned. E, that's just fifth, just third. C sharp 5 minus 13, or C, that's the minor third I guess. C5 plus 15, so that's 15 cents different. If we change our keyboard map to the one that defines C, then C is now 1 of 1, tuned to the equal tempered pitch, and now A is the sixth, and its pitch is different compared to if you define A as 440 and start there. So just something to bear in mind when you're choosing your keyboard maps. That's how you define the overall pitch center of your scale, independently of the actual ratios which come from the SCL file. So there are two quantization scales, they're called, which use MIDI input into the disting EX rather than a predefined scale. So let's just turn this up. So I've got a relatively fast sample and hold random CV coming through from the case here into the quantizer. That's major, minor. If I go up to beyond chromatic, then I've got MIDI, any octave, and MIDI exact. So basically, I've got the MIDI coming from this keyboard through the FH2 into the disting EX. And it's going to use the MIDI notes that I play to determine the quantization. So there I press C, E, and G, and then the quantized note is always a C, an E, or a G. Or if I could quantize to a or G or an A, then it's G or an A now all the time. So you can basically just hold out the notes you want to quantize to, and you could, as long as you've got one held down, you can kind of keep adding to the selection. Now by contrast, MIDI exact is only going to let it play the exact notes you press. So if I press, say, C and E, it can quantize between this C and that E, but it can't choose, say, that C down there or this E here unless I press it. In fact, there it goes. So again, if I press that B and that A, it can do those two notes, but it can't do that one unless I press it. So yeah, you just choose the exact selection of notes you wanted to play rather than it being any octave. So by contrast, that's the any octave version. That's now an A or a B in any octave you like. That's just the two I pressed. So yeah, that's those two extra quantization scales. So far we've been using the Quantizer triggered, and we've been multing a trigger from a keyboard or from an LFO, or we've been using it in an untriggered mode. The other option you have with this is with an ES5 expander attached to the disting EX to have the Quantizer itself generate some triggers. So if I just change this around here. So we'll take our, well, let's start, keyboard's there at the moment. We'll start with the keyboard. So, in fact, you can see triggers firing when the notes fire there. So we'll turn the gate input off on the Quantizer, and we will take the gate from the ES5. Just get rid of that. In fact, why don't we get rid of all of this so you can see exactly what's going on. So gate from ES5 now into our synthesizer voice here. So whenever the pitch changes, it's heading into there. And in fact, if I take my LFO and have that running up and down, then the Quantizer is running ungated. I mean, you can still give it a gate and be in control of when it samples the CV, but in this case, it's just watching the CV run up and down. Every time it finds it's changed, it's going to output a trigger, which is then triggering our ADSR in this case for the synthesizer voice. There's a couple options on the gate mode. So triggers is just going to fire out a little trigger, very short. Inverse triggers is the opposite. It's basically going to keep the gate open most of the time, but then give it a short low pulse when the note changes to re-trigger the envelope or whatever else you need to re-trigger. And then gates relates the output gate to the input gate. So in this case, I do need to go back to having a gate input, which I'll take from the, let's go back to the keyboard. So I'll keyboard into the CV, and then I've run out of cables, so cable. So keyboard is now gating the Quantizer, which is also generating the gate out again, and the output gate is as high as long as the input gate is. So that's options for generating triggers from this if you've got an ES5 handy to output them from the disting EX. So the final thing I want to cover in the Quad Quantizer is the calibration that it contains in common with the chord engine and tracker and other algorithms in the EX. It can automatically calibrate the 4 VCOs that you're controlling, so you don't have to worry about tuning them all. So I've got 2 of my synthesizer voices here. I'm taking a sample and hold random CV, which I'm multing to the 2 Quantizer inputs, and driving the volt proctor for these 2 voices. So they should be playing the same thing at this point. And as you can hear, they're a bit out of tune. Or very out of tune. And I could sit here for ages and try and fiddle and tune them. Or I could get the disting to do it for me, which is what I choose to do. So I've also multed the outputs through this little mult here, so I can take a calibration signal quite easily. So we'll do number 1 first. You see in the input key that input 5 is the calibrate input, so I'll plug that into there. And then from the menu, the Quad Quantizer calibration, calibrate output 1. So this is going to basically take over output 1, send some CVs through here, listen to the output, and we'll have to wind it up so it keeps making a sound, and it's going to listen to it in here and figure out the necessary calibration. So if we just press the button again, it should do that. That's good. And then we'll do the same for the second voice. Turn that up again, and this is output 2, so I will go calibrate output 2. There we go. Back down. So that's our 2 voices calibrated and playing the same pitch. Nearest makes no difference. Of course, now we could then have them, let's give them some different CVs. Let's take that one out of there. Maybe. So there we go. So now 1 CV out of here, 1 CV out of here, quantized into a nice harmonious major scale. And that's it. Cheers.